situation when it comes to hydro in Sweden, because all the hydro is far north, and people really, I mean, it's colder on Stockholm where I live, but far north. I lived there 11 years, I won't go back, it's really cold. But that's where the hydro is. So we had to build from the hydro down to the population centers, and it's the same with the wind. If you really want to transform this system, you need to go into infrastructure more than you're doing. And I think you have the same situation. I'm not really familiar with the Indian situation as such, but just listening today, I would guess the transmission is part of what you could actually work with. This is my colleague, he's thinking about Scandinavia as a battery. I'm going to link to that. And there are a few things with wind power that we need to at least address. And we need to be honest on this. And I told you this morning that part of the reason why we in the Nordic can take a larger amount of wind is that we actually rig the market. The design of the market is that if you want to build a windmill in Sweden and run it, you also have to take the balancing cost. So you have to be active in that market as well. And that turns out a fairly good decision because we have an evolution of wind power in the Nordics which we can handle. Now there are a few properties of wind power. It is fluctuating, you already know that. But it's also so that electricity is not the homogeneous good over time. It's not only storage, but it is valuable differently when you produce it. It's a lot more valuable if you can produce it when it really is at peak. So 1 kilowatt or megawatt hour, however we measure it, is not the same. It's different value over time. The other thing is that output is uncertain. And forecast errors are costly. And I'm a bit, I believe the forecast errors are costly, but I think they're different. And I think also that we're learning. And it turns out that in countries where the wind power industry are doing their own balancing, they're learning quicker than in countries where someone else is taking that responsibility. That would have been my guess as well, because they actually have to take the cost themselves, and there's some incentives to learn. But it's also location specific, and that's where the grids comes in. I mean, you'd want to, if you could choose where you want to locate production, you choose the location close to consumption. But you really cannot do that with all resources. And hydro is a particularly good case because you can't. You'd have to build it where the rivers are. And that's the end of story. But that also means that if we're building a lot of wind power in the North Sea, we might end up being behind the bottleneck. So there are profile costs, balancing costs, and grid-related costs with wind power. And if you look at that, of course, that takes away, that is particular for these kind of electricity generation, and you'd have to take those costs into account. Nuclear doesn't have it, our hydro plants doesn't have these kind of costs. In the long term, both me and Leon expects that the system will adapt. It will happen stuff. There's always engineers, there's always entrepreneurs that find out stuff, and they would take away some of these costs in the long run if their incentives are there. And that's why I'm picking at Spain the whole time, because they haven't incentivized doing anything if you're a windmill owner. So I mean, I'm coming back to that. And he also has a calculation of when those costs become really costly. And I think this goes very well for the European market as such, because there are other studies saying the same, that around 15 or 20%, in his model 10, I'd say that is a bit pessimistic, but around 15 or 20%, the increase in system costs are increasing in an increasing rate, or however you pronounce it mathematically. it really becomes costly. And there is a European study showing that if we're going for the 60% renewables that we're talking about, it's far beyond the cost of electricity, really, generation. The system cost becomes huge. So having said that, tomorrow we're trying to and not me personally though, but I was involved in this project, we're talking to the UK government who's worried about capacity in their system. And we just did this, and this is really, it's American data, most of it, and we really just looked at the cost of capital and levelized, I mean, it's the cost of capital per some unit, megawatt hours, in this case. And so it's $1 per megawatt hour. And if you look at the system, you're having, in this particular case, which the Brits have, an island, and you just want capacity if something happens. It turns out that an interconnector that we're looking at from Norway to UK is the absolutely cheapest way of having capacity into the system. So transmission turns out to be really cheap if capacity was what you want. The other thing with transmission, and this is we've looked at the DC line, is that if you have overproduction, you have a lot of wind, you can actually turn around. So using this capacity for safety when it doesn't blow, but when it blows a lot, you can turn around and you can get rid of some of the overproduction you have. So an interconnector in that sense is rather good, as long as you trust the people in the other end, right? If you don't trust them, if you think that they'll turn it off when they want to, it's a bit difficult. It's not an issue between UK and Norway, and hardly between Norway and Sweden, but in certain areas, of course, this is an issue. You're scared. I don't also think in the long run interest, if you're selling something, you don't turn it off on and off, because in the end, people stop buying it from you. This electricity is a long run relationship. So you only do that a couple of times, and then people won't buy from you anymore. But I think interconnector, it's a cheap way. It's a low-hanging fruit. So, having said that, thank you very much. Any questions?